Um, well, hey, as we are entering the second question, if you're watching this now recorded, um, uh, in here, he talks about how the opposite of poverty is not wealth. You remember that? It says the opposite of poverty is justice.
Mhm.
Um, how did poverty play a pivotal role in the lives of the people in this book? Like, how do you see that played out?
I'll jump in. So, kind of going back to the first question too. I've grew up, probably as white as you can be, in a bubble, and so, always thinking like, man, we live in a just system, right? I mean, everything is just. And as I with Blake, I watched The Wire like freshman or sophomore year of college. Um, just in grad school at Baylor, dealing with these issues and really hammering away at my whiteness and just kind of gathering different perspectives. I think you see in this book that it's supposed to be a just system, but there's so much that is not. When you see the way that they can, make a jury all white, or how judges don't listen to appeals even when the evidence is there. I mean, it just kind of opened my eyes. Like, I knew that this was something, but this gives concrete evidence that there's so much unjust. And me being a white man, if I was to commit a crime, and me having some money too, it's, I'm going to be able to get a more just verdict than somebody who is in poverty, or who may be around different situations that are just so different than what I am. And that they're not going to get a just verdict, and that there's just so much that is unjust in our system. And I think that's something I've been struggling with, is how can I get that in my head when I've just been so sheltered and grown up in really this white culture that believes the entire opposite of that.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it, as you say in there, like this white culture, and I think it's just so prevalent. It's the air we breathe. And how do you tell a fish that it's swimming in water? I think that's why there's such a reaction to some of this talk of systemic racism, and people going like, well, they don't, because it's just what we swim in. And so I think Dr. Ibram Kendi talks about this quite a bit, and distinguishing um, and saying how white people are both the perpetuators of racism, but also the victims of it. And so that you've been taught some of these things. And so it's been taught to you that this portion of the city just has more crime. And so it's a lie has been told to you. And so you've bought it, but you also have perpetuated it in other ways. Um, and so I think it was just helpful in the way he's explained it and talking to people about it, so that, because the knee-jerk reaction is to kind of push against some of that, because you're like, oh wait, I can't say I've done that to people. But you just see, like, when you think of it this way, that it's just been taught to you, and you see it in this book with just like how many as Malcolm likes to say, it's tendrils are just gripping so tight in so many different spheres, and especially in the court system. It's kind of scary. And I think they just reading this going like, so really, just if you have money, you can get out of whatever situation. Obviously not whatever situation, but it's just like the amount of times that he would reference men being disbarred or being kicked out of it after having taken over a case. And you're like, if he just had like an adequate defender, like, they wouldn't be on death row. And as you just think about like all these people that have been wrongly accused, that are on death row or have been killed, and you go, that's our system. That's just wild. That's
And
wild.
one more thing, like I really love the way that he wrote, and it helped me to kind of live in the frustration of that. Like, I don't think I have a lot of experience in that frustration, but just that, yeah, I'm innocent, and everybody's thinking that I'm guilty, just living in that frustration. And a couple times where I just like throw the book down. I'm like, why don't they see it? And so, it's very hard to get that
Wow.
where I as I've grown up.
Yeah.
I think one of the ideas that you touched on, Slim, was kind of this getting pushback when you're told like you're part of the problem as uh, as a white person, that you're benefiting from, well, that you're being hurt by racism, I guess, but then you're also like in a way benefiting from it as well. I think as Christians, or at least as I guess I would say specifically within our denomination, we shouldn't be surprised by this because of the idea of total depravity, that sin touches everything, and that so if I'm completely honest with myself and like this, I'll be confessional again. Like, I mean, I have definitely been a racist before and said and done racist things and benefited from that. And like, I'm perfectly fine admitting that. I've done plenty of other terrible things on top of that. That's like this. So like, I can see where every facet of my being has been touched in sin in some way. But I can recognize that God is still working to sanctify me in these areas. Yet it shouldn't be surprising or shocking to us that that's part of our reality. And yet we somehow want to appear as if we're more enlightened, as if we don't think that way. I think this is like, I don't know. I also went to school during what was called the post-racial America, which was after Obama became president, which I was like, that's an absurd notion, but just this idea that just because a Black person achieved the highest office in the country, that we had somehow gotten past the issue of race, which of course didn't become being true. Just recognizing that that it's truly a different experience, and I don't understand it. And experiencing these stories helps me understand it better. I'm never going to be able to fully understand it because I'm not in those shoes. I didn't walk in that place. I don't have the cops looking on me with suspicion. I don't have, the woman clutching the purse when I get in the elevator with them. But I've heard those stories from friends, and I've seen those stories told in different ways. And I think that was the thing with Just Mercy, is it's, if you think about it, like the events of the story did not happen all that long ago in the grand history of things. And, it also showed quite a contrast in like there's still very overt racism in the South. And I think the justice system that still exists to this day. Obviously we've seen it's not just in the South. There's a lot of these incidents that have happened in the North recently, but just that there's definitely been a breeding ground for a lot of sin and hatred against, Black people. And I think we've all hurt from that, because I think we've all lost voices and experiences. And I think the thing I appreciate is in the past 5 or 6 years, it feels like we're telling more of those stories and hearing one of those things. And I mean, you could just like, I'm not saying like everything he's in is great, but like if you look at Michael B. Jordan's like career, it's like the past 5 or 6 years, it's like these are really good stories that are giving us perspective on Black lives that people haven't experienced before. Like the fact that like a Marvel movie came out and was basically about dealing with slavery was like amazing to me. I was like, so comic book nerds are going to finally deal with the issues of slavery. We're not going to make it the X-Men anymore. We're actually going to have Black people saying these things. It's not going to be white people being metaphors for racism. It's actually going to be the voices of Black people.
But we're still for the
Sorry, I was
for the X-Men. I agree. Wolverine's my guy.
Yeah, but it's still like
Let's
a bunch of white people as a metaphor for racism. It's really weird.
Old Man Logan is good. Okay. Yeah. But hey, just going back to that point before we move on, is there a time, like, is this just specific to the United States, his statement here, or is this, you think this is universal? That the opposite of poverty is not wealth, the opposite of poverty is justice. Do you think that's always the case? Is that like just or just isolated to us? The opposite of poverty is justice.
I think that's like a human thing. I think because with justice comes like validation. and like not like in truth, right? So like I think that if you look at pretty much any country, there's been injustices done at different degrees. And I think that the countries that have healed the best have pursued justice like very strongly. Um, I mean, I know that it's been talked about a ton, but I remember when I came back from studying abroad and just how Germany addressed everything. And I remember talking with them because I went during the primary. So I had a lot of really interesting discussions about how it was like Hillary or Trump. And people were like, what is your country? And I was like, I'm going to stay here. And like how, like, they just talked about how it was like things were just addressed. And I mean, does that mean that Europe is perfect? Absolutely not. But like specifically with like the Holocaust, I think that that does mirror like America's history a little bit of just like an entire specific people group was like, there was a narrative that started before, right, about how they were, you know, inhumane, like all of these things that were fake, like the science studies, like all of those things. Same thing with the Jews. But then it was like post it, they like took ownership, and I think that that was justice because like we met on some of our tours like people who you know, parents or grandparents had been in Auschwitz or had been at Dachau or Birkenau, any of those, and they talked about how there was a collective understanding that everyone played a role and how that like allowed their family to be better and it like and function again and become whole because there wasn't this like eraser of what had happened. And I think like from the close friends that I have, like that is where so much injustice and poverty still stays, is it's like we're not addressing the systems in place that are creating these pockets of poverty. And true justice would be understanding that like the Section 8 housing that specifically only typically houses minorities comes from like there's a direct line. It's not just like, oh, well, it just happens to be this now, it's a choice now. It's like, no, it's not a choice. There are specific things. So I think it's everywhere, but I think you can see the examples of how pursuing justice alleviated like poverty and alleviated some of those entrapments.
One of the things that one of the things that Stevenson is doing in that line is he's also asking us to rethink what we think of when we think of poverty and when we think of justice, in the sense that poverty it's not just a lack of resources. It's a restriction of one's opportunities, and you know, the only reason you have I mean, you know, whether it's the creation of ghettos or as you know, as Allison was saying, pockets of poverty, is because there are folks who have had essentially resources just wrested from their grasp, and it's fundamentally unjust. And so the reason and the reason why it continues is because those injustices just continue. And that's a common I mean, you know, that's common to a number of human societies. So one of the things that I think he's doing in that line is he's asking us to or when we think of poverty, expand it beyond just an understanding of not having resources, and also when we think of justice, that it's more than just you know, that it's more than just kind of a fair hearing in court, but it's actually kind of a broader social commitment to equality.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that are going on there.
That's good. Yeah. A couple weeks ago, when I preached on Isaiah 58 and a bunch of other passages there's a, you know, title on justice not optional, trying to think of looking at the deeper word, the deeper meaning of justice, and it is not just something we can opt in and opt out of, but that this is something God requires, to the point where the churches that are not pushing justice. He says, away with your noisy symbols. You know, he doesn't want to hear it. And it sounds so harsh. But then also you go, but what else are we doing if we are perpetuating injustice? And if justice is more than just, you know, the gavel in the courtroom, it is about caring for the, you know, the quintet or the quartet of the vulnerable, the, you know, the poor, the orphan, the immigrant, the widow. And then what we added when we talked about this more modern is now people of color, right? It's caring for, you think of it just caring for the orphan, like it's going to be justice to have ways to give them access to have, you know, a family that would lovingly care for them versus growing up in a foster system or in a group home or things like this. Having so much, I mean, especially at that age, there's so much that goes on with brain development, things like that. But you can also apply that to the widow and things like that, that doesn't have a network of people to care for them unless the church comes alongside doing that. And I think the same is true with immigrant, and with people of color and things like this. Like unless the church steps into these things and actually works against the stream, against the system, then things just doing nothing and means the system just continues to move on the way it is. It's like a river pumping down. You do nothing, the river's just going to keep going. And so I think that's why it's going to be a perpetual fight, which is why it's exhausting. And people don't like to be in this system because it's never ending. You would like to say you did it. You would like to have a mission accomplished poster at some point, but that is going to never happen because every day we're going to keep fighting that in new ways. But
that's one thing that really impressed me about him, you know, the author of the book, Brian Stevenson, is he's been doing this for decades.
Oh yeah.
Being the worst of humanity, just the worst in all kinds of ways, right? The worst crimes committed, the worst justice applied, the worst family situations, the worst everything, and has just hung in there to fight it every day. And I just like, that only can happen because God gives it to you. We don't have that in ourselves. We don't. I don't, you know? And I'm just like, wow, I think, I mean, I know he's just a guy, but I think God had a very much of a mission that he empowered him to keep going. Because I can't imagine getting up every day and seeing what he sees without becoming so discouraged that you just give up. And he is a bright guy. He could give up and have a very lucrative law career, you know?
Right.
But he didn't do that. So I just thought that was incredible.
Wow.
How he just stayed in it. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually stumbled on a YouTube video within this last week where he gives like just a 5-minute, you know, because of the heaviness of everything in our world right now, once in a while, my wife and I get on YouTube and we look for funny clips, usually from comedians we love or whatever, right? And so somehow his name popped up. It looked like it was part of some type of series, like, you know, what's happening now or whatever. There was kind of a label at the bottom of it or whatever. But anyway, I saw the name, I clicked on it. It was like a 5-minute deal. And he had just posted it in the last week or two. So it was all, you know, about all current events. And yeah, just the spirit of the guy is so impressive, right? When after you obviously you read this book and you look at his career, and I'm sure I would imagine there's times when he is uncontrollably angry at people and the systems, and I can't help but think he wouldn't be, but just the peaceful spirit that he has and the way he communicates, and really a hopefulness on this last video that we saw, even in light of all that's going on. It's almost like maybe things are actually going to change now, right? Kind of a thing. But yeah, just obviously incredibly impressive guy.
Yeah, I think that's something that we have to keep reminding ourselves as we see people fighting this fight for so long, is to, as he had so many people, whether, you know, it seemed like many grandmothers or older ladies encouraging him, grabbing him by the hand and encouraging him. But I think it's going to take more than that. I think it's going to take more people speaking up so people have advocate and voices. Because I mean, the hard thing is, what if he never did this law, this nonprofit? I mean, like, what if these people didn't have an advocate? I mean, that's kind of what we talked about the Sunday in the sermon. It was just kind of like, what if Paul didn't have an advocate? Like, what if you don't have an advocate? Like this, that just is rough. But also to read Malcolm's book whenever it comes out on how to have hope in discouraging time. Not discouraging time. Utter evil and
Look, yeah, that's my magnum opus. You gotta wait. It's gonna take a few years for me to put all that together. So.
All right.
It's okay. We'll still be struggling. So
we've arrived.
That's for sure. Are you serious writing a book on that topic, Malcolm?
Well, yeah. Like that's the magnum opus that I'm. So the first book, I have to finish the dissertation and get that academic book out, and then the next book project that I want to do is essentially the kind of applying my lynching research stuff to particularly like why does the church need to know this history? What does it mean for us as we hope, especially in the midst of violence? But yeah, I mean, the question of the dissertation is, okay, at this period where particularly Black Christians are dealing with the most brutal and public instantiation of white supremacy, how do you have hope in the midst of that? That's I'm purely doing the historical work right now, but in the back of my mind, there's this means something to us now. So that is coming.
We're all eagerly awaiting that. Yeah, we'll give you till next year. Cool.
Soon.
Just
soon, very soon.
Hey, some of the things that this book kind of presents are these examples of courts refusing new evidence or to grant new trials in light of new information. So he'd bring up this new information that would certainly prove this person innocent, and he would usually be met with, it's too late. But he'd have to appeal it above that. Why do you guys think, why wouldn't courts jump to analyze new information with, that constitutional promise of innocent until proven guilty?
Well, I was going to ask, sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, what it is. Well, one of the things that it is it's the institutional version of the fact that personally we never want to be wrong, and institutions definitely never want to be wrong. There's a lot of there's just a lot of once the verdict has been given to all the technicalities of reversing this thing that you've already said, like it's a whole lot of work. Like sometimes people are just gonna kind of get chewed up in the process. At least so goes the kind of institutional narrative.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's the Frederick Douglass quote that power never concedes anything without a demand, never has and never will. And Martin Luther King said something similar. But that's the thing. Like when it comes to things like this, it's only if you kind of make yourself a nuisance to the point that the institution can't ignore you or silence you. That's the only point at which progress can take place.
Which feels like where we're at in our country, right? Like feels like that's what we're at in our country with some of these arrests of these people who are going to lynch this man and these police officers. They weren't getting arrested until public outcry became so great that they made the arrest. And it's like, why does it take that?
Yeah.
But as you just said, power doesn't want to give it up. Doesn't want to be seen as wrong.
Also, I feel like, unless we're friends with a lawyer, we have a very, very oversimplified understanding of the law. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've had very good friends go through law school one of my best friends right now, we talk every day, and she's doing her internship this summer in the juvenile public defender office in Denver. And she's always like, Allison, like the law doesn't do what you think it does, you know? And it's like, because I think, especially as a white person, we grow up thinking police officers are good, they will help us. There's this, you go to, like, something bad happens, police officer will be at your house in 2.5 seconds, they'll take away the bad guy, and justice is served. And it's like, unless you've had a situation where that doesn't create that, like, that goes against that narrative, you don't realize, like, how the law is so effed up, for lack of a better phrase. And just like I know, like, even within, you know, like circles recently, there was a lot of talk about how, you know, men, specifically white men, like, can get away with these atrocious crimes because their character, you know, is then put in question. And it's like, well, he couldn't have done that. He's like Brock Turner, great example. He's a swimmer. And it's like, you know, like I went through some things in high school where it was like someone's character was more important than my version of events. And it was just like, what the hell is happening? And I think that until you have the understanding that the law isn't cut and dry, it's really, really hard to like understand that, like, it's not like that this could happen and has been happening. And I think that like there needs to be more public awareness. And I think that that's what's happening now, is people are like, wait, we're going to call a representative, we're going to call these offices, we're going to do these things because the law isn't doing what we've been taught it's supposed to do, which is immediately, you know, do an investigation, do this, go to trial, condemn, because that's what all the TV shows are. You know, like a crime is committed and then they're on trial the next day. And it's like, really, it takes years. And so I think that this book gives that glimpse of, like, he is so eloquently talks about all those long days and nights that he worked on these cases. And then, you know, like, the appeals process is this. And like, I think most of us, we just think, oh, new evidence, like, cool, they're going to jump on it and be, oh, like, let's correct our mistakes. And I think that that's what we see, like, the systemic issues within, okay, these people haven't changed. You know, like, we have these judges, we have these counties that have the same sorts of people in power. And so it's like, if people are only benefiting people and networking has always been tied to wealthy white people, then it's like that networking is always going to protect the wealthy white people. And it's like, that's where these boys will be boys. Like, just any of those types of sayings come true because it's just like inaccurate. Because really it's like they were able to get away with it because they had a network that took care of them because they knew someone who was in a political power or in a law office or whatever. And so I think it just, like, those things happen because we as a public have been, you know, taught a version of the law and the system that just isn't accurate for anyone, you know, like, but it's just oversimplified. And so I just think that that's going to be a massive awakening. And even my friends who are in law school are like, man, like, my professors are talking about how this is unprecedented, the amount of people who are understanding the work that lawyers do. And so I think it's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's just something that I've been talking about the last couple of years, being like, the law can do that? Like, what do you mean? Like, it's literally ridiculous.
Yeah.
It helps absolutely no one. And yet we'll, you know, taught in SVU that the bad guy will go to jail and there are people fighting for you. And that's just not the case.
Yeah.
You know, and she's a public defender and she was talking about, she's like, I'm just like, this is my first time doing it. And I have 12 people on my docket. And so she's like, how am I supposed to have time to represent? And then you get into like, well, why are 12 people being arrested, right? So it's not even just like that those people who want to make change, but why are the people who want to make change having such a large, you know, like, group of people?
That's good.
I think that was something that, like, they had like one shot, I think, in the movie. I don't know if he talks about it in the books, but when he's driving up to the prison for the first time and you see them out there working, as I think that's the thing people don't realize is, like, once you're in prison, they put you to work and you're basically a slave at that point.
Not
and
basically, legally.
No,
Legally.
yeah, what? Like
you,
the law literally
like,
says you have no rights.
Literally says that you are.
Yeah. So 13th, which is a great documentary that's on Netflix, gets into a lot of that stuff. and I don't know if the book got into it more, but that's I think part of the I'm a very big part of the reason is like once you're in the system, they want you to stay in the system. And there was actually pressure from the prisons to get people into their prisons that they're putting on law enforcement saying like, look, we're going to quit our contracts with you if you don't give us enough people to fill up our prisons. Like that is literally a thing that's happening in our country.
Yeah, the book
right
did
now, like that they're privatized prisons now. So does he talk about that in the book?
Yeah, I did go into that a little bit and talked about how, especially with privatized prisons, that it's profitable to have more people in their prison, and that, I probably marked it up, but I don't have it here available. But I think it was between, we'll say 1990 and 2000 or something like that. There was like a new prison opening every 10 days, something like that.
Yeah.
Radical. You're like, oh my goodness, like it's just skyrocketing. How many?
And then if you want to get further down the rabbit hole, look up the companies that actually use those privatized prisons for labor and realize how many companies you might be supporting that are using slave labor in this country. And then you'll like have a hard time going to sleep.
We're getting everyone real skeptical here today.
Yeah, I'm getting like, I don't know. I'm going like down the rabbit trail of like, here's all the things you didn't realize.
No, but that.
And then Malcolm's over there like, this is my life, man. I've been doing this for decades.
That is, man. Well, and this is
all. I totally appreciate, and I'm looking forward to your book because I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it's very. I'm reading Stamped from the Beginning, and I'm definitely like I need the Christian perspective on this because I like what he's doing with the history, but he seems to be missing the contradiction that like people of faith are on both sides of the aisle. Mm-hmm. How do we reconcile that? Because he's very quick to condemn them for like being racist, but then when they're anti-racist, he doesn't seem to be wanting to give them credit. And I'm like, but the same, the people who profess the same things are also the people who introduce the anti-racist ideas, which you seem to think are the good ideas, right? I haven't even got to the anti-racist ideas from the secular people yet. That's how early in the book I am.
It's a great book, man.
It's still fascinating.
I absolutely love it. The other thing, Allison, what this has done for the law in getting people to understand the law. I mean, one of the things that it also ought to drive home is how important history is, because even if we think of the history of particularly law enforcement in this country, beginning with like slave patrols. The fact that many of these institutions began not necessarily to protect everyone, but to protect particular people from other particular people. And when we see that kind of continuing to happen, part of it is because we haven't actually said publicly that this is actually what these things. This is actually what these things do. And so we can kind of live in this fantasy world where we believe that kind of everyone has these rights and everyone has these opportunities and things like that. Or we can actually look at the world that we actually live in and think, oh, wait a minute, that's not actually true. If this is the ideal, then that's something that we're going to have to fight for. One of the things that's kind of constant in the history of particularly this country is that specifically Black people throughout the history of this country have constantly tried to call this nation back to its ideals because they're constantly seeing, wait a minute, you guys are saying these things about yourselves, but we're being treated clearly contrary to these ideals. It's not, and that's not kind of exclusive to us. It's clear in a number of marginalized groups in this country. So, like I said, it's an advantage that more people are seeing it. But as I've said on other things before, the question is how long are you going to have the stamina to fight it when you may not be the one actually suffering, fighting for someone. There's a sense in which I have to continue to fight because I have to continue to fight to survive.
Mhm.
And we have to get to the point, particularly as a church, where we actually do see one another suffering as our own. That has to be the place that, like, we have to get to that. We have to get to that spot.
And that's proximity, you know, like going in love with our friends to be like, wait, this isn't their fight, it's mine, you know. And like, if you're only in a church community that looks like you know, you're only in your job or whatever, like, I mean, I have now, like, you know, 500 plus kids I'm fighting for that, like, I didn't even know I could care, you know, more than I did before I took that job, you know. And I think that that's where that proximity and choosing to put yourself in uncomfortable situations to love hard,
Yeah.
and then to be overwhelmed with the burden of loving hard in a system where your kids aren't treated, you know, like, and I'm new to that, like, I'm totally new, you know, I'm 25, this isn't something I grew up with, but like, yeah, I think that that's what at least I tell my friends. I'm like, show up because of that proximity piece, you know, like, because it's like, otherwise you won't, like you said, like, have the drive.
But one thing that I
It's
think
exhausting.
I was listening to Austin um, Channing Brown on a podcast talk about proximity and how she cautions that word, and I agree with. I'm making your point as well, Allison. But she also cautions and says, I think a lot of times white people hear that and they think, well, I have this black friend, and they say,
Yeah,
racism isn't real.
I hear you.
Right. And so, like, yeah, yeah. So this woman Rachel, you know, they have a YouTube that they're going to share with you and say, what do you think about this? And I think that's a difference of proximity. Maybe I think listening to the multiple voices, and you know, not to say like believe this, but I think listening to multiple voices, and I mean, just reading this book, I feel like it's like hard to ignore the facts that were coming out of this. But as we know, history, people will ignore things just because it doesn't align with what they want. So I think pushing people into proximity in the sense that someone's plight becomes their plight, someone's hurt becomes their hurt, is the way for that to happen. Not just have that friend that you're asking, hey, how did this make you feel, and things like that. And I don't think.
And then also just realize that there are, like, everyone is a human being, and there are going to be bad faith actors out there and people who are going, like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Malcolm, but like, black people can be racist too. So it's like, sometimes I'll find my friend, you know, you'll have that one friend who's like, well, this black person said, and it's like, they don't speak for everyone. So don't, like, you know, don't like find the one black person that agrees with you and then perpetuate a racist idea that that one black person holds, because
Yeah.
I found that as a very destructive idea. And
There's
if you
idiots
have,
on both sides.
yeah, but yeah, you could speak to that.
Think about
Malcolm,
total
better.
depravity. It's total.
Yeah, it's everybody.
Yeah.
Well, and there's the fact that you know, especially when we're thinking of racist ideas and narratives, it's because it's in our air and in our water. I mean, we can all drink it and breathe it, and we can all kind of we can all internalize those things. So it's something that we've all got to be on guard against. But like, yeah, we've all got to be on guard against it. Even though I don't benefit as much from believing racist ideas than like Slim might. Like, I can think, like, I can think that black people are inferior, but like, that doesn't help me. except perhaps to make some white people around me more comfortable.
I guess that's kind of specifically more where I've experienced, where it's been like the older black people who are in a place of status and privilege have been like, oh, these young whippersnappers need to calm down. And it's like, well, it's nice to say that when you're pulling $6,000, you know, 6 figures a year, and have a really nice house and a family out in the suburbs. It's like, you know, it's like, and I'm the one living in the apartment next to the people that you want to quiet down. It's like, oh, it's like, you know, then I kind of start to question the veracity of your claims a little bit. But, you know, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of a tangent. But I just,
That's good.
I guess what I just want to say is just find educated voices that you can trust and friends that you can trust, because and have discernment. Like, we definitely are benefited by having Malcolm here in our community, and there are also, Malcolm points us to great resources of people who can tell us with wisdom and discernment. And please don't just take what your friends post on Facebook as true, please. It's so bad right now. I want to just like give everyone some like journalism 101 fact checking lessons.
Even with all the algorithms, aren't they all posting what you want to hear? Yeah. Hey, so it's 8:01. Are you guys okay if I ask 2 more questions before we close? If you have to go, that's fine. Just, we'll all internally cry. But I feel like one of the odd things that this book does from the get-go is it kind of makes you see that this is a real life version of To Kill a Mockingbird. And you guys know that, as you read it, like Monroeville and like is just extremely proud of their hometown hero Harper Lee, and they had this white lawyer Atticus Finch defending this African American Tom Robinson against this rape charge of this white girl, and it's I think it's so ironic that they're so proud of this story and this movie. And so what do you have to say to a community that simultaneously wrongfully convicts a man due in large part to their own prejudice, all the while celebrating Harper Lee's work? Is it ignorance? Is it naivety? Is it indifference? I mean, what would you tell to the community of Monroeville about this startling parallel?
It's I'm just gonna be blunt here because I've always hated To Kill a Mockingbird. It's white savior syndrome of like we get to be the hero and save the poor black man from his plight. Look at how enlightened and powerful we are. And then the contrast is awful, obviously, that Michael B. Jordan comes in and they're like, we don't like this guy. And it's obvious the reason why when you're watching it is because he's black and he's trying to liberate the black men that they've put in prison. And so they don't like it because he threatens them and he doesn't need to be saved by them. He's the one doing the saving. And all of a sudden they're not the ones in power. They're not the arbiters of justice. Yeah, I don't know.
You would say
I've
lawyer being different. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's to me, it's like the power dynamic. It's a power dynamic change. And James Baldwin, I don't think talks about this To Kill a Mockingbird specific. Maybe he does in his book, but he talks about this idea of like, that in his book, The Devil Finds Work, about how all these movies perpetuate this idea that like white and black people can be friends as long as the black person is still subservient, and how that's just a sinister racist idea. And I feel like that's very much to be into To Kill a Mockingbird is just as long as you let us do the saving, we're fine with you being saved. But once it's a black man that comes in, I think that's when the power dynamics change and they feel threatened. And you have, that powerful scene when he goes in and they're like strip searching him, which they would never do to any white lawyer.
Yeah. Anybody else think there's what would you say there's a difference between the movie and the reality?
I'll jump in. I've been, I see this in kind of my family and some friend groups is that they're all for equal justice and equality until it encroaches on cultural norms. So, with all the statues coming down, with the protests, which they call riots. I mean, every protest they call is a riot. And just, it's encroaching on the culture and the power that's within the culture. And they're kind of blind to it. They don't see that. No, you don't really believe that. You don't believe that because you're not willing to give up so that there can be equal justice. And so I don't know about you guys, but me personally, I've just been really frustrated recently that some of the things coming out of people's mouths, it's just, you can't see it. I mean, you're a part of the culture and the problem. You don't really believe it.
That's good, Sam.
Yeah.
For some, there's just people just want this whole race thing to just like, can we just be done with this whole race thing? Like, haven't we, like, we've spent spent enough time, guys. Like, we're done. Like, we did it. Read to Kill a Mockingbird. You know, we read Huck Finn in middle school and stuff. Like, we did it. Like, stop. Why do you keep bringing this up? Like, well, I keep bringing it up because people keep dying. And so people and also kind of these systems continue to churn on and shoot people up in the midst of it. And so the sooner, like I said, the sooner we get to the place where we're on the same page that, like, these are deep cultural wounds that need to actually be healed, as opposed to this just being some kind of quick fix thing that we can deal with you know, a few laws, put a few different people in office, have a few new relationships. It's like, well, no, it's actually a little bigger than all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And the sooner we, I mean, it's why, I mean, you know, like I said, recent events have shown some folks kind of how deep this goes, but we've really got to see that this not only goes deep, but it's been hundreds of years in the making. And so if we're going to see progress, it's going to require generation upon generation upon generation of work. And like, there's some people who are going to see that, and then there are some people, I mean, this is my own thing. I only have so much energy to convince people, like, because like that in itself is an exhausting thing to do if someone is insistent on not seeing. And so there's a certain extent to which there's a point at which I have to leave that to the Lord, and just think through, hey, well, I have these opportunities to love my neighbor here, and that's what I've got to do. You're not on board, hey, the Lord's gonna have to deal with that. But for now, we've got work to do.
Okay, so I gotta get personal for a minute, and told you what I told Slim when he came to Redeemer, which is that since you're about to be a family man, my dad was a pastor, actually at 2 different churches. Your ministry is your family, Malcolm, first and foremost. So raise your kids well, raise them to love the Lord, pursue that with all your heart, and you know, like you said, it's going to take generations, and part of that is going to be building that generational heritage. And if there's ever times that you feel weary in the church, talk to us about taking a break, like, because you'll need it. Like, you can ask Slim. There have been literally days he's called me and said, hey, Blake, I just am not feeling it today. Can we take a break? And I was like,
I'll tell that.
Do what you need to. Dude, that's what people need to, that's the expectation we need to have, is like, when y'all need that off time, y'all need to be able to take it, because your family shouldn't have to suffer for the church to go forward. It's like, we should be able to support y'all. So I just want you to know that as you're about to be a father, is like, you need to be able to have that space and that room to grow. And especially because you're fighting a battle that you're fighting, like a double war, you know. You're fighting for the right for your family to exist, and then you're fighting for the right for your godly kingdom as well, you know. So like, you're fighting a double battle there that most of us are not going to have to fight. So I just want you to know that. So hopefully everybody else agrees. If not, I'm sorry.
Good word, Blake. It's a good word.
I want the ministers in the church to feel like they can have the space to heal and take a break when they need to, because I've seen so many people get burnt out, and I've seen my dad get burnt out, and I don't want that to happen to y'all.
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, I'll echo that. As a former minister, ministers need friends too. So yeah, I hope that you guys will be able to have friends in the church, not just congregants.
I appreciate that. Yeah,
Appreciate that,
that's
man.
good. That's good. I love this church.
Totally all right.
Me too. I
Oh, I'm just crying over here. That's good. That's good. Well, I think I feel like the going back to that naivety or whatever it is that the people of Monroeville have about this book. I think it just, to me, it depicts what all of us have in our own hearts. Of we all want to deny that we are actually the bad guy. Like, we all want to be like the hero of the story. We all want to be David slaying Goliath, and no one wants to be told you're actually Goliath. You're actually the evil one. And I think that the hard thing is for them, they're like, well, this is such a great story, and it's like this fiction out there, but when it's told that no, you're living in it, I think to quote Ibram Kendi again, where he says, like, the heartbeat of racism is denial, and the heartbeat of anti-racism would then be confession. And so I think it has to start with confession of, like, I'm a sinner, or I'm a part of a system. It's such a simple thing that, like, we do as Christians all the time. And so it feels like the church should be leading in the charge here, of able to acknowledge that we are the sinners, that we are we've done things to hurt our brothers and sisters. And like Blake said, like, I'm a racist, or I've done racist things. Like, today I did something racist, the next day I didn't. Like, it's like there's never an arrived point. There's days that are better, days that are worse. I've said something that was off color. Okay, I should work on that. I should think about that. Right there, like, just like the rest of our spiritual life. You just let your yard grow. It's wonderful. Grass isn't going to grow beautifully. You kind of have to attend to it, right? I think that's kind of how this works as well. But let me ask you this last question.
The weeds grow with the heart, or the wheats grow with the tares.
Yep.
That's what I like to think is, like, right now it's easy to see that evil and racism progressing with some of these deaths, but then we're also seeing that anti-racist sentiments growing as well. I always like to think about that parable, because evil is moving, but good is moving as well. It's just sometimes easy to look at all the tares and just be like, look at all those weeds in the yard. You know?
Aslan is on the move.
Right, Aslan is on the move.
What was your last question, Slim?
Last question. Based on this book and Stevenson's work, what is your interpretation and understanding of the title, Just Mercy? What is just mercy?
I kind of see it as, what if it was just mercy? Like, what if our criminal justice system was tied around mercy instead of justice? And what would that look like? We wouldn't be imprisoning innocent people, children, mentally ill. I mean, maybe, I don't know if he's getting at that, but I see it as kind of, what if it was just mercy?
There's a lot of, I think he very purposefully named this book, because you could think of it in a lot of different ways, and a lot of different plays on words of how you could look at it. But at the end of the book, I really appreciated how he talked about himself, and that in all the darkness and brokenness of working with people, he came to see, I'm broken too. you know, and that really was highlighted to him that I'm one of the broken ones too, and I need mercy. And when I receive mercy, I want to give mercy. And I thought that was so true and very vulnerable for him to admit, you know. And the best way that we become merciful people is if we understand our own need for mercy and have received mercy. So, and continue to receive it. Yeah, but like something that you just said in the question before, Slim, like, I think people, especially white people, they're afraid to admit they're wrong. They're afraid to admit they're sinful. They're afraid to admit they're racist. They're afraid to admit all those things, because the bottom line root is they don't believe the gospel themselves. Because that if you don't understand your forgiveness in Christ, no matter how rank you aren't ever going to want to confess any of that stuff.
Come on, Missy.
Right?
Come on, Missy.
He's been telling me. It's not me. He said this to me lately, you know. So it's really my husband who's the smart one.
You take all the credit, Missy. You take
No, but it did. It resonated. Like, oh my gosh, when I'm so like, guilty or ashamed or embarrassed, or I don't want to go there or whatever, I'm completely dismissing the strength of the gospel.
Yeah.
That no way. That's the reason Jesus came. You can be forgiven for being the worst racist on the face of the planet. You can be forgiven for that, right? And you can move on with hope. And I felt like he touched on that kind of theme at the end of this book, and that's what I really appreciated, that maybe we just need mercy. You know what I mean? Kind of idea. So there's lots of ways you could look at the title, I thought.
So for me, when I read it, I basically thought that like mercy is properly administered in the context of justice.
Yeah.
So really, like, the best mercy is just mercy. And I mean for us as Christians, this is especially true, because what we see in what Christ did on the cross is the perfect example of just mercy, of like true justice is not compromised by God's mercy. He's shown his mercy on us by judging our sin in Christ, and if that's then the context that we then think of our entire lives as people who have been recipients of a just mercy, then when we look at this misapplication of justice and a complete lack of mercy, we have to do something about that, because it ought to be so contrary to what we've experienced, and so contrary to what we say that we build our life around, if we build our lives around the gospel. And so for me, it wasn't just kind of just mercy in the sense of kind of merely mercy, but that it's mercy administered in a truly just way. And so and like I said, I mean, the choosing of the title demands that you do this kind of work. So I think that's intentional, but
he doesn't.
And one thing, sorry, in Malcolm, I think in one of the stories in the book, it plays out when he's has that correctional officer who makes him strip down in the bathroom, and that same officer, I mean, he doesn't get up in his face. He doesn't say you're racist. I mean, he just goes about his day, and then he shows up in court and defends the man that he's defending, and then the correctional officer comes back and says that, hey, I had the same sort of experience, and now I see, and so that there was some just mercy on that other side.
Yeah.
He doesn't explicitly give the definition in the book, which I think, as Missy says, it leads to interpretation. There is one part where he does put the words together, and where he says the power of mercy is that it belongs to the undeserving. It's when mercy is least expected that it's most potent. Strong enough to break the cycle of victimization and victimhood, retribution and suffering. It has the power to heal the psychic harm and the injuries that lead to aggression and violence, abuse of power, mass incarceration. And I just love that. It's just like the power of this is that it's going to the undeserving. And so I think it brings in the just as in the sense of what's right. It's just. There needs to be justice for these those individuals, but they're also true justice is not abusing these individuals, and we don't see true justice on some of these individuals, and that's where you go, why not show mercy to them? Because we all need it. And so, like the examples of those who've the one of the stories of this young boy who robs the woman in the morning, then later that afternoon she gets raped, and so they assume he's the one who raped her, and he goes to jail. Yes, he did something wrong, and so the justice should happen, but he was now on death row for something he didn't do. And so you're like, okay, well, either way, you're like, okay, justice hasn't been done, but that's where you go, like, but then you can also identify with, I think, as Missy brought back to kind of our brokenness, we go, you identify, if you can look at your own sin, your own unworthiness, like who are we to, as he says a lot in this, like who are we to say who gets killed and who doesn't get killed? And so I think the power for me in this book is that it makes you grapple with your own sin and your own sickness, and how are we to judge others in this? I mean, obviously, like I think that true justice should happen, but then how are we to condemn others to death and things like this?
I thought the movie
embodiment too, like the embodiment of Christ in us allows us to act in mercy, because I think of like what both Missy and Malcolm said, like, and then the example Sam gave of like when he was in there getting strip searched, like I remember like just throughout all the vignettes, even the things we see on media, like the anger, and it's like, okay, that's a flesh response, right? So it's like, what does it mean to truly be able to embody Christ and make sure I'm feeding myself with that so I can act in mercy and just mercy, in the sense, because I think, I mean, I've talked to y'all before, but like sometimes I can be so angry I just want to cut people off, like whether it's other pastors or whether it's whatever, and it's just like, okay, wait, how do I like allow for growth and be the like have the like embodiment of Christ, because Christ lives in me, and if that's truth, then like how do I make sure that he's the one shining through and not Allison, right? Like, and so like what does that look like? And I think that Brian Stevenson like allows you to realize that it's possible in the worst situations, right? Because I think sometimes, unless you've been in those situations, it just looks so exhausting and so impossible. But it's like, okay, how much more important is it to feed my soul in the morning if I'm walking into situations that are going to be horrible? Like, I know that if I skipped spending time with Jesus before school, it was horrific, because it was like I knew that it was going to be hard, tense, and exhausting. And so it's like even more so when you had the scales fall from your eyes and you see these injustices maybe for the first time, and it's like, wait, don't put the scales back on. Paul didn't do that, so you shouldn't either. But like, what does it look like to allow Christ to work through you and not always have that like visceral response? Because I think that response can be healthy in some ways to validate it, but to truly not let it like ruin a movement when Christ would be seen on the tree, right? Like the true moment of like, wait, I have no reason to treat you kindly, or to like, and I know people are like, you should always treat people kindly. But if I were Brian Stevenson, I think he could have gotten away with doing so much and been totally validated. So I think like what he did though was truly like a step beyond of that just mercy, because he had the power of Christ within him in that moment.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, no, I would hope no rational person would actually want justice enacted upon themselves, because at least in our belief, our justice is like being receiving God's wrath, which is a really horrifying idea. So I think all of us want to receive mercy, and we want people to give us mercy. And so I think, I don't know, like it's just very humbling to think that, like, in the eyes of a holy God, I deserve his wrath, and yet he didn't give it to me. And I think that's something we have to return to and look on. And there are definitely times where I forget that, and I'm not as forgiving, and I'm not as nice as I should be. And, I'm not, living up to that standard, of course. That's the process of sanctification. But I think recognizing that, like the movie in the book says, is like we're more than the worst thing we've ever done. And yet the worst thing we ever done in the eyes of God always is justly deserves his wrath and punishment. And yet we receive his mercy, which is the great mystery of the faith as to why he did that.
Yeah.
For his own glory. And I guess that would be it.
I think the one of the things that he brings up after saying that we're more than the worst thing we've ever done is how I think he then, at least maybe it's in the epilogue or something, he talks about how, so that means that you're not, if you stole, you're not just a thief. If you've murdered, you're not just a murderer. And I think that's something that we can all, whether we've ever stolen and been a thief before or been a murderer, I don't think here before, but I think we can all see our own sin and go like, okay, that's not all I am, right? And I think that's a powerful thing for us, like this book. And we know he's Christian, we know he's, but it's not an overtly trying to preach the gospel type book, but it does, and I think it does very well. Preach that gospel that that's not all you are, because your identity is now you are a son of God or a daughter of Christ, right? That this is who you are now. And so I don't know.
Yeah, I just want to add,
I haven't heard from you guys. Do you guys know Michael and Karen? They're in South Carolina.
Hey.
They used to live in Waco. They said if they lived in Waco, they would be jumping in on this new church thing called Mosaic.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we were so excited. We started at 7:00 Eastern time.
We've been waiting a whole hour.
I'm sorry.
Last night we watched Emmanuel about the the
AME church.
The AME church here, where the 9 people were murdered by the young man in their Bible study.
Yeah.
And they it was so powerful because when he was arraigned and the judge brought everybody forward to speak that wanted to speak to him, and that was when something overtook, obviously the grace of God overtook him, but they said, instead he was expecting their incredible wrath, I'm sure, and they all said, no, we forgive you. And to me, that was just mercy. That was just mercy. I mean, they described their loss, and then they said that they forgave them. And for him, I mean, he hated those people, and to receive that had to be something powerful.
And I think yeah. Is that on Netflix, Emmanuel?
Yeah.
It is. It is now.
It's either Netflix or Prime, one of those.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to look because I hadn't seen it on there before, but it might.
It's worth your time. It's good.
It's good.
Yeah, they're putting a lot of movies and stuff to Netflix and Prime now, so
yeah,
I'll have to check it out.
But I think one thing I know with that, and I think with big picture, with George Floyd and what was the one up in Dallas?
Both MG.
Both of them, John.
Yeah, where his brother then forgives them in that moment. I think there is an expectation of a response like this church and like his brother. And I think, but we also think that's where we go just mercy. I think it's good to be able to see like there still needs to be justice that happens. And I think there is a quick desire to see mercy given, which we as Christians will champion mercy and grace and redemption hundredfold. But I think we also want to seek out as a church justice in the light of that. And I think offering mercy and grace to someone doesn't negate their jail sentence, right? Right. Yeah. There's a spiritual aspect there. But you can also see that some of the stuff that happened here where I think there was a grandmother who was talked to Brian out after a court case and said, like, of someone who had been murdered, and said, like, I didn't want them to give them the death penalty. And there's a way to offer grace even and still hoping to see justice played out. And I think that's just that thing that we also want to seek both, justice and mercy, and not to divide the book in that way. But I think that's important for us to see both, and for us as a church to try to push and fight for both. And especially this group, and then I think the church at large needs to speak up for people of color, so it's not just their fight. It's not just always asking them to respond. And so I think that's the part that I think was a good kind of sending out of being champions of justice. And yeah, just thinking through, like, I heard someone in our church say, now I want to become a lawyer. And I think that's a right response to reading this book. So if you want to just switch careers, that might be great. But just seeing how heavy this is and how intricate this is into our own system, like, you're like, ooh, we need some good Christian, not just Christian, but Christian lawyers that fight for true justice, and maybe bring the Equal Justice Initiative to Waco. That'd be great.
I did want to add that, like, I know someone who's an atheist, but in a similar line of work as Brian Stevenson, advocating for people who can't really afford for court cases, and he absolutely loves this movie. And he's not the kind of person who would, like, he's about as far from the gospel as you can get. So I think it's resonating with people who even aren't of our faith, and recognizing that, like, this is the kind of justice that we really truly deep in our bones desire. And that was just really encouraging to me. To see justice, that. And I
think justice is an evangelistic tool.
Yeah.
It's love preached out loud, right? Like, it's like people see the love when they see something like this. So I think you're right.
Yeah, and then I had, like, another atheist friend reach out to me on Facebook, just asking me, like, how do you handle, dealing with all, because he was seeing people on my feed, like, posting racist stuff. It's like, how do you deal with this? Is like, and I was like, what's disheartening, but I feel like I have to speak up, justly, like, it's the right thing to do. So just, I think hopefully we can be bastions of light in this time. And I will say, like, my atheist friends are definitely looking at us in the church and being like, okay, how are these people reacting? Like, they're waiting to see if our actions are where our mouth is like, do y'all really believe in love and mercy and justice? If you profess these things, then you should be the one spearheading this stuff. So I think seeing stuff like this is encouraging, that we put out there and say, like, yes, there are people out there, fighting these battles who just necessarily gonna see them in the news all the time. So very encouraging to see this work.
Well, y'all, I never announced.
We're about to lose power here. So
we disappear.
So if you accidentally cut off, don't take offense.
The Labassi's hit us. No, we're gonna close this up. I didn't say it was gonna be an hour on Sunday morning, so I guess I shouldn't have said it right when we started. I could have just told you it was an hour and a half, and we would have only been over by 4 minutes. But that's how I do it. I just have to, like, put a deadline and just barely miss the deadline, because Hey, thank you guys for jumping in and for chewing on this. I know there's a lot of people who weren't able to join us tonight, but have been chewing and reading this material, and so I'm excited for the church to be doing this. I know this book has been around for a while and things like that, but I'm glad we as a church got to do this, and I agree that this connects to people that don't believe as well. And so this, if you do talk to someone who doesn't believe, this could be a good conversation starter, and because I think modern evangelism is not what it used to be. I don't think it can be the 4 spiritual laws. I think it has to be something a little bit more relational and something like that. So I would encourage that as a tool for that. So, but let me pray for us. What's that?
Thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. We're so glad you came in from all the way from South Carolina. Thank you for that hard work. Actually coming on an hour early. From now on, I'm starting posting 8 Eastern, 7 Central.
You're gonna have to advertise it that way.
Yeah, be sure and do that for us.
Okay, just for y'all. Awesome. All right, hey, well, let me close in prayer. Jesus, thank you for this group. Thank you for this study. Lord, thank you for Brian and for all of his associates that work with him in the Equal Justice Initiative. We pray more groups like that would spring up here in Waco and across our nation and really across the world, Lord, that true justice would be fought for, and Lord, that your church would be the one on the move doing it. So, Lord, give us the courage to speak up, because we know power doesn't like to give it away easily. And Lord, would the gospel, as so evidently displayed in this book, be the thing that drives us and sustains us through it all. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lynn.
Bye. Thanks. Nice to meet everybody.
Yep,
You
you
too.
too.
Thanks for jumping on, Sam.
See you.
Hey, Malcolm. Oh, he already disconnected.
He's gone.
Oh, well. Bye. I'll see you later.
Bye.